Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Illumineers Quest podcast, where we talk everything Lorcana. I'm Zach.
And I'm Jacob.
And thanks for coming on this journey with us. Okay, so today we were both going nuts yesterday. So today's Saturday. All the massive Atlantis card news came out yesterday.
Which, can I just say it? Atlantis, my dreams are coming true.
100%. And we'll obviously get into it more, but we both said Ryan the Last Dragon was supposed to be awesome property, kind of underwhelming. That doesn't seem to be the case for Atlantis.
Atlantis is on fire, and we'll get into it.
It sure seems to be that, for sure. So yes, we'll get into it. So today we're talking about how we think that Into the Inklands is going to change the paradigm of Lorcana.
And I know we've said this in the past, but it's a little different, and we'll get into that.
I'm sure we did say something similar. We're obviously much more mature in our
knowledge of
Lorcana.
Yes,
that's a perfect way to put it. And so I think that as we continue to learn and to be smarter with the game, that's a terrible way of saying that, but as we learn and grow, we have this. And so anyways, that's a very long-winded introduction. But we're going to talk about Into the Inklands, more specifically how we think that this is going to change the way the game is played, because there was a lot of announcements yesterday that were really impactful to the way that the game can and probably will be played.
Absolutely.
So, with that said, as always, everyone, thanks for listening, and we'll get into the main topics here in a second. But if you're watching us on YouTube, we have the audio versions on all the major podcast networks. We also have the YouTube channel at Illumineers Quest. You can follow my awesome takes at LorcanaPod on X/Twitter, or you can email us questions/comments on LorcanaPod@gmail.com. Wow, I completely spaced sitting there looking at it. And then lastly, we've plugged the TCG Player affiliate link a couple times. I'm not going to go into a huge spiel this time. If you are buying singles, Into the Inkland is coming up. If you're buying Into the Inkland singles, if you want to buy Into the Inkland singles, wow, I'm clearly off my game.
We didn't do a rehearsal.
No, I'm clearly off my game. If you want to buy singles, TCG Player is the best place to do it. We have an affiliate link in the description for all of our episodes. It very much helps support the podcast, and we appreciate all the people that have done that so far. With that said, card of the week.
All right, so I've got an interesting one today, and I think it could be out of the ordinary, but I think it goes a little bit into what we're talking to today. And basically, it just goes overall with the idea of the reemergence of Emerald. So the card I have today is The Beast Is Mine. Okay, so this is an interesting card, because I think...
I see where you're going.
You see where I'm going.
I see where you're going.
So this is a 3-cost inkable action, not a song. Chosen character gains Reckless during their next turn.
Which, I definitely... I was going through... I ran out of sleeves last week, and I was going through and unsleeving things, and I had those sleeves ready to play with Bell, Hidden Archer.
So that's... I think that was the initial idea, right?
I think we've seen that a couple times now, where they've released kind of teaser cards where the whole process or the whole package hadn't been fully released yet, and I think that Emerald got its full package released yesterday.
And so I thought this isn't... It might not be on the front of everyone's minds right now, but I think it's an interesting one, that a Chapter 1 card that might come back into play.
I agree. Maybe it's super relevant, maybe it's not. I think it's very much worth keeping an eye on. Is the way I also put it.
I think it's one of those cards. Maybe I think it's similar to a spellbook or something. Maybe it's not something you absolutely need, but I think it adds a combo factor.
Yeah. So the Beast Is Mine, like you said, gives anybody Reckless. The one downside I'll say is that it's not a song. I think if it was a song, it would be really, really meta next season.
I think it would be for sure. I think there's a few ways around it. I think there's, especially in Emerald, I think there's some cost reduction in general.
Yeah, there's a few. I don't know if there's cost reduction. That's more of an Amber thing.
The only one I can think of is the Genie Power Unleashed.
Yeah, and I guess the Mickey from Chapter 1 to no, that's just whenever he quests, opposing. Never mind. So yeah, I think there's a few things that we can get around, but in general, I think you're right. I think it'll be a good one. So, Reckless is going to be a big topic today. we're definitely going to get into Reckless, which is why Jake chose this one this week.
I know it's a random one, but I thought it was interesting to bring
I
it
think
back up.
I think it's very relevant to the conversation, so I like that choice a lot. Okay, questions, comments from listeners. We have a deck review, if you will, from a listener. Shout out Doug. Thank you for sending your deck in. He's looking at one of like the new Tiana style kind of empty your hand decks, and then you have the Tiana from Steel, which disallows your opponent from playing an action when your hand is empty.
When the player's hand is empty.
Tiana Celebrating Princess, 4 costs uninkable and Steel. Yes. So when the player's hand is empty, your opponent cannot use action cards. So things like Be Prepared, Grab Your Swords, all of those are not allowed. And this has been a pretty popular aggro deck as of late. And specifically, Doug was asking about some issues that he's had beating the discard decks, which can be tough. But so there's the decks that I've played with Tiana, and I played against you this week with this deck, and so you have a tiny bit of experience with the two. But Doug, the one thing I'll say is you have to have some card draw in there. I like looking through your deck list, like you don't have really any card draw. And, I mean, you do have Popsicle, which I guess gives you a little bit. But the one thing you have to keep in mind is, like, you have to understand what your opponent's playing. And so knowing going into the matchup that your opponent's going to try to discard some cards is obviously step one. And then if they are going that route, like rushing into a Tiana and trying to play into the scenario where you have no cards in your hands probably isn't the best solution, because you're just going to end up where you don't have a ton of options, especially in like the Sapphire package that you're playing. You don't have a lot of like heavy questers like you get with the Amber version that I've played with, like the Lilo and the Doc options that come with 2 lore questing. So my biggest recommendation would be, if you're playing a discard deck, try not to blow out your hand getting to the Tiana and playing into that where they don't have any actions, because the discard deck really doesn't play a ton of actions. I think you said it was the Emerald Steel, which obviously the steel piece of that does have some item removal, but in general, they're usually trying to discard your cards through Bucky and playing Floodborn characters. So it's not really actions that are the biggest issues with that one.
So here's an interesting little piece here that I've seen, that if you are doing a Steel Sapphire...
Oh, he said Emerald Ruby. Sorry. Emerald Ruby discard. So yeah, I mean... Sorry, you catch out. Emerald Ruby, not Emerald Steel. But go, continue.
Okay. So there's a little interesting little combo I've seen with Sapphire Steel Tiana decks, and it has to do with Winnie the Pooh having a think. Whenever this character quests, you may put a card from your hand into your inkwell face down. So it's emptying your hand, but on top of that, you can card draw to try to draw Tiana, right? To get to Tiana. But then you're losing an extra card every turn to try to empty your hand while building your ink.
Yep.
So it's an interesting little combo I've seen.
Yeah, Winnie the Pooh might not be a bad option. You have Fishbone Quill in here. That honestly I think is a good kind of compromise. If you have any Winnie the Pooh, it might be worth putting in over Fishbone. To where if you get to a place in your hand where you have a Tiana and you want to play the Tiana and then go the I don't have any cards in my hand route, then you can quest with Winnie and activate the ability to get rid of it, but you also have a character on board that's questing versus Fishbone Quill. I like that option a lot. And he did say Emerald Ruby, and so I messed up on that on the Emerald Steel initially. So again, there's not a ton of removal or a ton of actions in Ruby until you get to Be Prepared. And so I would try to keep a couple cards in your hand, until you get to 6 or 7 ink. And then you can, get to the Tiana game phase and discard everything from your hand yourself and then just quest away. But I know that's kind of all over the place, but anytime you're playing discard, the idea is to understand that going into it and not, it's a very much a slow burn deck. When you're playing, Bucky and Prince John and something else like turn 2, 3, 4, they're not trying to do anything turn 2 or 3. And so if you can get a couple cards on the board and start questing and put some pressure on, then you can do it. But, Popsicle obviously early on helps a bunch too. Throwing in a Hiram, if you have any, might be worth it as well to card draw in the situations where you haven't found Tiana yet. So I would say between Winnie and Hiram, you probably have a few little changes you can make to help out there. But
you need to make. I mean, the key to this is pull Tiana. So
yeah. So having Hiram to draw and to sift through would definitely help. And then the Cinderella, the Knight in Training that like draws one and discards one to help sift as well is a good play that he already has in there. But okay, I think I've rambled on about that too much, and unfortunately I don't think I was very concise, but I hope that helps a little bit. And I want to finish because he also commented, he said we haven't mentioned Bolt yet. I think me and you have mentioned Bolt.
Not on the podcast.
I don't think we have on the podcast.
So I'm actually like a I love Bolt.
Yeah, I like Bolt a lot. I was a huge Bolt fan when it came out. For some reason I don't think of it as a Disney movie. When I think of Bolt, I just don't associate it with Disney. It's a weird one. I don't know why, but I don't. But anyways, I agree. Bolt would also be a cool one to see at some point too, because I like the animals. I like the animal cards. I love the Dalmatian puppies. I love Pongo and all that stuff. So it would be cool to see the animals.
That era, there's a little that timeline of Disney animated movies was very interesting, because that was kind of their way of doing their own version of Pixar almost.
It kind of seemed like it, yeah.
And I forget the exact name, but there was a pigeon bird movie that was around the same time that they were army birds. I forget the exact name.
I know what you're talking about, but I can't think of it either.
I watched it quite a bit as a kid. I forget what was it. I'm gonna remember.
I don't know. Yeah, we'll come back to it, but yeah, I agree. I mean, Bolt's a good one, and we should have mentioned it. So I just wanted to say shout out Bolt as well, since we were talking about the stuff from Doug. So Doug, thanks for this. Thanks for the note. Hope that helps a little bit. But again, discard is just you have it's going to be annoying.
Yep.
So. Okay, so news / what's on our mind / week recap. It's kind of the topic of the day, so I think we're just going to jump into it because the news is mainly what this episode is going to be about, and because there's been so many cool stuff that has been released. As we kind of alluded to at the start of the episode, the main reason we wanted to have this discussion about Chapter 3 again is because we think the way that the game is played will shift pretty drastically. We've already talked about locations quite a bit. That's going to definitely be a new card type that you have to include in your decks. And on top of that, there's a lot of mechanics that are very different from what we've seen before. I think the biggest mechanic changes, and you and I talked about this before we started, that we saw in Chapter 2 was the bounce package in Amethyst, which was a very different way of playing it with all of the Merlins and the Mems. And then obviously the resist keyword added a new wrinkle into the system.
Well, I mean, the way I kind of put it in my mind at least is Chapter 2 added to the meta. This is countering and answering the meta.
And I think so too. And they've definitely said that in the dev diaries and the Discord where they talk, where Steve Warner, one of the game's creators, I guess
co-creator,
one
co-designer.
of the best way to put it. Yeah, designer I think is probably a better term to use. Is said that the first 3 sets have been made together, and that there's a lot of stuff coming out that has already been planned, and locations being one of them, but also that they expected to see control very early on, but are hoping to see some shift this time. And so I think that a lot of these nuances that are coming out are going to very much change the way that the game is played.
I mean, there's some interesting pieces here.
Yeah, the only other thing I want to note about Chapter 2 versus Chapter 1 is the added card draw. I think everybody started to get into the card draw game, and I mean everybody as in all the ink types, and you started to see some really unique ways of doing that. I think we're continuing to see that. But the biggest thing I think that's changing this time is, one, we talked about Ursula last time and her ability to remove actions from your opponent's hands, and so that you can't be solely reliant on action cards to get you out of trouble anymore. But 2, there's a lot more interesting removal that's coming in there. And so I don't think, in general, the reliance on actions/songs to do the removal is going to be near as necessary as it is today.
So I think challenging like sheer con decks are going to make a big emergence. That's just my little...
I think that's a very big possibility too. I think that, again, as you see the kind of the balance or the scales, shift or move between like really heavy actions to like really heavy characters, then sheer con does become more useful. And so let's get into a couple of these real quick. We'll start with Ruby because we're talking about removal and actions.
I just want to say this before we get into anything. I do not think that Be Prepared is going to be bad by any means.
No.
I don't think it ever will be. There's lots of counters to it now coming in Chapter 3, but I just want to preface by saying that I don't think that Be Prepared is ever going to be a bad card to have.
No, that's probably a good point to start off with. Like, all of those things are still going to be very relevant, but up until this point, like if your opponent had Grab Your Sword, like a Tinkerbell Giant Fairy shifted on turn 4 and then sings Grab Your Swords, there has not been an answer to that. Like, if you know it's coming, the answer is to just like not play any cards so that they don't get removed. Like, that's the option that you've had. Now there seem to be options to proactively try to keep your opponent from being able to do those things. Be Prepared is another one of those. Like, turn 7, if you're playing Ruby, there's probably an opportunity for your opponent to play Be Prepared and wipe your board. So you have to be in a position where you're okay with that happening, whereas now you can proactively keep that from happening.
Yep.
So we're talking about Ruby a bunch, and so like I said, let's start with Ruby real quick. We've already talked about Jim Hawkins, Space Traveler in Ruby, who allows you to play a location for free when he is played. We've talked about Moana, which is kind of like the Amber Moana, who allows you to ready your characters when she quests in a location. And now we're getting into a little bit of the card draw and removal of Ruby. So the first Ruby removal that we've gotten, which I think is going to be a pretty fun card to play, is Prince Eric, Expert Helmsman. So we got Prince Eric at the helm of the ship that he is, captaining, if you will.
Apparently, I've researched a little bit here, but this card, just from a lore perspective, has a big deal in the story.
It sure seems to be that way, yeah. And so he's a 4-cost uninkable card in Ruby, 2 strength, 2 willpower, which actually in this case helps him, which is kind of weird, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Quests for 2, and then his ability is whenever this character is banished, you may banish chosen character. So this is another one of those like counter tools where if you play him and your opponent plays Lady Tremaine, then they're just both gone.
Yeah.
So Teeth and Ambitions is another one. Like, maybe you Teeth and Ambitions Prince Eric and then banish a character on their team, and then since he's banished because of the Teeth and Ambitions, you banish another person on their side. And so I think the removal gets very interesting from that point.
No, the 2 willpower is fantastic for this.
Yeah, it's shocking that we're saying that, but that is the case for this card. So yeah, I think Prince Eric will be an interesting one. We have some Ruby removal, which is very Ruby-esque, if you will. Makes a lot of sense for Ruby. So yeah, I think that fits very well into the theme. I think that has the potential to be a really good card. Again, with, maybe people don't run 4 Be Prepareds anymore. Maybe they run 2 and have a couple of these other options in there now to supplement. But keeping into the Ruby side of things, we have a Vanilla Jim Hawkins, 2-cost, inkable, 3 strength, 2 willpower, quests for 1, adding to the Atlantis theme.
Whoa, wait, Atlantis? You mean Treasure Planet?
I mean, can I ever get that right when I'm talking about it?
What? Do you mix those movies together?
No, I'm not. I'm saying, like, I always put my foot in my mouth. We talked about this last time. I always just say stuff and I am wrong. But hey, I know it's Treasure Planet. Milo is Atlantis. I don't get them mixed up. We're
Milo Thatch, Jim Hawkins.
Yes. Della Duck from Atlantis. I'm kidding on that one. I actually didn't get that one. Put my foot in my mouth on that one. So Della Duck, we got another duck to go with the set. The Unstoppable Mom. She's a reckless 3/3 So that's another like the ruby, kind of removal to go along with your other reckless characters in there. 2 cost uninkable. So a couple uninkables there, but
if you don't know Della Duck, by the way, I've seen some confusion online. She is the mom of Huey, Dewey, and Louie.
Yeah, I almost said that too. And then lastly with Ruby, we have the Sumerian Talisman. Is that right?
So this is interesting from a lore perspective, but you can get into this card here.
Yeah, so a Ruby item, which is more card draw for Ruby, which is fantastic because Ruby is one of them that definitely needs it. And it says during your turn, whenever one of your characters is banished in a challenge, so specifically in a challenge, you may draw a card. So again, very much in that fighting theme, which again, to your point with Shere Khan, if you have Queen of Hearts / Sumerian Talisman,
you could draw 2 cards.
You could potentially draw 2 cards, and you're really doing a good job clearing board. And so if there's, maybe you're like Ruby Steel, where you have, pack tactics and the ability to challenge to challenge readied characters, to keep the board clear. But yeah, I think that one, it's a 3 cost inkable as well for the Talisman. So I think that one could be a Ruby staple as well. Obviously we'll see. And then lastly in Ruby is a vanilla Milo Thatch.
It's not vanilla.
I mean, he has
vanilla.
+2.
Vanilla means no.
I know.
Come on.
It's plus. He has +2 strength while at a location, so it's not super vanilla. But Milo Thatch.
This is the first Atlantis card we're talking about.
From Atlantis.
This
hyped. One actually is from Atlantis, not
Get hyped.
Planet, so.
Come on.
But we're getting into the rest of Atlantis after this. So.
I understand, but come on, Atlantis people, get hyped.
So yeah, so that's the last. So point of Ruby is again, like I think Ruby. The biggest shift we'll see in Ruby is less be prepared and more of these other cards that are going to allow you to challenge and get lore from challenging with Shere Khan, like you mentioned, to get cards from challenging, like you do with the Talisman and Queen of Hearts, and to banish cards when you're challenging or getting banished yourself, like through Prince Eric. So I think the point there is that you're getting a lot of motivation to challenge with the Ruby stuff, which is again right up its alley. Where do you want to go next?
Let's do Amber.
Okay, let's go Amber next. I think the Amber's a relatively quick one. We've talked about the puppies a bunch. The Dalmatian puppies where you can have 99 on the deck. That's always really fun. We have a new action that is a 5 cost uninkable in Amber, and it says whenever one of your characters quests this turn, gain 1 lore.
And this is called 99 Puppies.
99 Puppies, yes. Thank you. So that's a really cool one on brand. I also think it's a relatively good one. I don't like the uninkable piece of it, obviously, but imagine like turn 1 through 4, you play 4 characters, and you're in a relatively like wide aggro deck, and your opponent is playing control. You play this turn 5, you quest all 4 characters, and you go from getting like 5 or 6 lore to 10 or 12 lore. Like that could like turn the tides really fast.
I think it's definitely an aggro piece. Definitely an aggro piece.
Okay, so that's really the big Amber kind of like tool. The other 2 cards we have, this one is a vanilla, but it's not in the sense of its flavor text. Its flavor text is very different.
It's in Atlantean.
Yeah, Akita Atlantean has Atlantean flavor text, but other than that, it is a vanilla 1 cost 2/2 quest for 1.
Best 1/2/2 in the game
for sure. And then lastly, there's the Heart of Atlantis, which is exert to pay 2 less for the next character you play this turn. So it's basically another lantern, except it costs 4 instead of 2, and you get 2 less off of the card instead of 1. So more reducing the cost of cards, like we kind of mentioned earlier. So. I think what do we go into next then? There's nothing. There hasn't been a ton of Amber yet, and so that's not a ton to talk about. But I think that's again is going very much down the Amber route. We're kind of assuming Akita Floodborn, or at least I've seen a lot of people online because the other 1/2/2s in Amber have Floodborn, like their targets for the shift. You have Stitch and the Queen, and so this is the 3rd one, so there's a lot of speculation around that, so maybe we'll get that in the future. But Sapphire, there's a lot to talk about in Sapphire.
Of course.
So Sapphire has a legendary item.
the first in the game.
First legendary item, which again, I talk about my X/Twitter takes. The day before the legendary item came out, I posted and I said, "Are we ever going to get a legendary item/location?" Less than 24 hours later, guess what happened? We got a legendary item. So hey, I have some hot takes, and sometimes they're right.
I mean, you're throwing it out there. That's for sure.
Yeah. So anyways, legendary item. It's called Lucky Dime. It's a 7-cost uninkable, and its ability is exert for 2 ink. Choose a character of yours and gain lore equal to their lore, meaning or whatever their lore count is. And a couple caveats that I've seen already is like for Tamatoa, for instance, if you have 4 or 5 items on the board and he has 5 or 6 lore, then you get that much off of it. And so it has the ability to get you a bunch of lore. And before I continue on the talk about the Lucky Dime, I want to throw in Audrey.
Audrey Ramirez, Atlantis, baby.
I know. I also want to throw in Audrey because she plays very well with Lucky Dime. And so Audrey is a 5-cost inkable character, 2 strength, 5 willpower. So very much in that line of like Jasmine, Aurora, in that 5-cost realm. She has Ward, which is huge to keep her on the board. And then her ability is Spare Parts, saying whenever this character quests, ready one of your items. And she quests for 2. So there's a world where you exert Lucky Dime for 2 ink with Tamatoa or Belle, Strange, but special. Get 5 ink or 5 lore from them. Quest with Audrey for 2 more to ready Lucky Dime to then do it again. And you end up with like 15. And then if Belle, Strange, but special can quest herself, then you end up with like 17, 18 lore in 1 turn.
And you might be asking yourself, how am I getting all this ink to do this? How am I building to this?
Well, if we're gonna tease it, we might as well start talking about that one too. There's a new song in Amber, or gosh, man, I'm really off my game today. There's a new song in Sapphire, 5-cost inkable, Friend Like Me, one of the best arts in the set so far, in my opinion.
I agree.
Genie, love the song. And it says each character puts the top 3 cards of their deck into their inkwell face down and exerted.
And it's 5-cost inkable.
Yeah, so it ramps. It's another massive ramp card for Sapphire, which is huge because you really want to get to 7 fast to get the Lucky Dime out to start, questing away with your characters. And then obviously you want to get to 10 with Ariel. Man, I'm off my game with Belle to get to the 10 so that she quests for 5 with the Lucky Dime, and then you're bada bing bada boom, game over, even if you're at like 7. So again, I think the ramp from Sapphire is continuing to show. We talked a ton about in chapter 1 that the ramp was overrated, and we said that at the time because there just wasn't any card draw options really in Sapphire, and so you really tended to burn yourself out pretty quick trying to ink so much. Now through the Hiram package and Popsicle and a few of the other cards that replace themselves within Sapphire, you can really draw at the rate that you're inking, and so you can continue to ramp and draw to like really put pressure on to get to that 10 ink to just put tons of lore pressure on them.
You can get all your pieces on the board pretty fast.
So again, as we talk about, do I think Lucky Dime will be like the most played card of all time? Probably not, because again, it's 7-cost uninkable. There's a high tax to have that in your deck. If you get it early, you can probably just Fishbone and Quilling it away. That being said, with Fishbone Quill, you can just, it becomes inkable. And so it's not, it being uninkable isn't the worst thing in the world. But the lines where you get 15 ink, or 15 lore in 1 turn is going to be bonkers.
It's going to be massive.
And then lastly, there's a Tinkerbell card, which is 5-cost inkable, 3 strength, 4 willpower, quests for 2, that her ability is whenever one of your items is banished, you may put it into your inkwell face down and exerted. So, if you're playing against somebody that's trying to do a bunch of item removal with a Benja or something along those lines, you can use Tinkerbell to put that into your inkwell versus it just getting banished. So again, more ramp, that's very much in the flavor of chapter 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. The big paradigm shift for Sapphire, I think, again, maybe I'm really wrong in this. This is a hot take, but I think Lucky Dime could be very good. It again, like if imagine you play something after it. Like the reason I think it could be good is because You play Belle like turn after Lucky Dime. And so even though she herself can't quest yet, you can still get the lore from Belle because of Lucky Dime. Absolutely. So that's why I think it has the potential to be crazy.
No, I agree with that.
Anything to add, or?
I mean, you know what's honestly on my mind from all these reveals? Where's Amethyst?
Nothing. Has there been one yet? Okay, the Sorcerer's Hat. We have the Sorcerer's Hat and Mama Odie, which is Mama Odie's a really old one. And Sorcerer's Hat, we kind of talked about it, and it's kind of like, but... Like,
as a Amethyst being my favorite ink, where is it? Like,
I don't know.
I guess bounce is all they're giving us.
I imagine there's some more Amethyst shenanigans to come up. But okay, let's get into the rest of Atlantis. Sounds like we're done with Sapphire, and then we can get to Emerald real quick, and then we can like kind of take a step back and like do some more high level talk. So we have a vanilla Milo Thatch, vanilla, but he is a shift target.
Are you just gonna skip over Helga Sinclair in Steel? Are you not even gonna talk about?
I mean, we have a Helga Sinclair that's a 3-cost inkable challenger. She's gonna add to the Hook, Prince Eric, now Helga line.
This is Atlantis, dude. Come on. This is a big cast of characters we're introducing.
I understand that but we're trying to talk about the bigger themes, not just every single card.
I'm just saying though, when are we getting a mole? We need a mole soon. That's all I'm asking. We don't have them, but continue, sir.
Milo Thatch, clever cartographer, is the 1-cost 2/2 1 lore vanilla from Emerald. But we also got our first Atlantis legendary, which is the legendary Milo Thatch, King of Atlantis. 7-cost uninkable, shift 4, so that's huge.
It's Floodborn.
4/4, strength and willpower, quests for 3, with the ability, when this character is banished, doesn't say in a challenge like some of the Ruby cards, but whenever this character is banished, return all opposing characters to their player's hand. So you can clear a board. And keep your cards on the board.
So how does this work with Be Prepared?
That's a good question.
So does this...
I would imagine... Oh, I don't know. We'll have to get a ruling... If somebody knows, let us know. But we'll have to get a ruling review on that one because I don't know. Because do they all get banished or do they go back to the hand first? I don't know.
So, like...
Which one activates first?
Would this be helping your opponent if they play Be Prepared? Because they're...
It could. I don't know. Well, we'll get to that one, but that's definitely a good point to make. But the point is like, if you shift him in and challenge and banish, then it's basically a one-sided Be Prepared because all your opponent's characters go back to their hand. And so it's very much in the bounce, different type of bounce than Amethyst, but very much in the bounce shenanigans that you have with like Genie on the Job and Mother Knows Best from Emerald, because it's very much on clearing out your opponent's side of the board. And so I think that one is a huge one. We were talking about this before we started as well. I think there is a lot of potential there. Again, we have to look at the whole Emerald package to really understand if this is going to be good or not. This one is uninkable, unfortunately, so we're getting into some of the Emerald uninkables. But there's a lot of potential there. I'll say that. There's a lot of potential there. Okay, and getting into Lyle, the last big Emerald card we want to talk about.
Lyle Rourke.
He's a 2/4 uninkable, 3-cost. He has 2 abilities, and he quests for 1. So his first ability is in the same vein as Prince John. Whenever you play this character, you choose an opposing character next turn, and they gain Reckless. So it's keeping an opponent from questing, and they have to challenge in. Think Bell Hidden Archer. Think The Beast is Mine, like we talked about. And then secondarily, whenever one of your characters is banished, each opponent loses 1 lore.
And it does not include him. Whenever one of your other
characters is banished. So that's a big one. So again, like in the realm of Milo, maybe Milo goes in, shifts in, challenges, gets banished with Lyle on the board. Their whole board goes back to their hand, and they lose a lore. Like, that could be crazy.
I like this a lot.
I like Lyle a lot too, and so we were talking about The Beast is Mine. We have to bring Bell Hidden Archer into this discussion again. We thought there was potential for her to be big with John Silver in Chapter 2.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this adds to the the threat.
Well, I think what makes this such a big deal is that it's answering the Ruby meta. I think that's where like this is such different because it's Dragonfire, it's countering Dragonfire, it's countering Be Prepared, it's countering all these things that are meta relevant.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a perfect way of putting it. And then before we move on, I last but certainly not least is Morph, who's a 2-cost inkable, so that's a big one, being inkable, 2 strength, 1 willpower, and he's basically Ditto for our Pokemon fans out there.
What? That's all you're gonna give him? The 13th legendary of Chapter 3, Morph?
You're already getting on that bandwagon, huh?
The 13th legendary. So did you go through the stats? I don't remember. Did you?
Yeah, I just did, but you were too busy. And his ability, I said he's basically Ditto. His ability is he can be a shift target for any character. And I think that's very, I don't want to say paradigm shifting because it's not like the most massive card of all time, but it does create a huge, I don't know, kind of iffiness to what your opponent can do next, because depending on what card you're playing, the first thing that I thought of was Heroic Outlaw. Heroic Outlaw has lost a lot of steam in Rise of the Floodborn, but with Morph, Heroic Outlaw, if you're playing Ruby, could always be a threat. Because you could, it's not just Aladdin's that are an issue. It could be Morph that's an issue. It could be Aladdin that's an issue. You don't know what's coming with Morph. And so that, it's a shift target for all your Floodborns. And so he very much goes in a Floodborn deck with your Bucky potentially, if everything works out like that. If you have more tools for control-y type decks or mid-range type decks. So yeah, the shenanigans and Emerald continues to go with Ursula that we talked about last time, who, quick recap, has the ability that says when you play this character, chosen opponent reveals their hand and discards a song card of your choice. So again, you have the ability to discard a lot of the hard direct damage from Steel, a lot of the direct removal from Ruby, which is why we think some of those actions might see a little bit less play this time. But okay, that's all the cards. That's a lot of shenanigans. That's a lot of new, awesome, cool stuff. So give me your thoughts on what the game's going to look like going into Chapter 3.
So I think a lot of these pieces so far, because I think I'm going to be more hesitant because I don't want to get ahead of myself here because we don't know everything yet.
No, this is all with a grain of salt. This is all what we're thinking at this point in time. So
but I think there's lots of nice support pieces to other pieces we already have in the game, like a Lucky Dime. It plays into Strange but Special Bell. It plays into Tamatoa, and I think cards like that are nice. And then, like I've been saying, Milo Thatch and Lyle play into kind of countering the Ruby meta, and I think overall that's a really nice change of pace for especially a underwhelming Ink and Emerald in the past.
Yep.
Is able to, it's got something else going for it now besides this card. It's got something that is actually actively countering.
Yeah, and the biggest thing that I thought of with the Milo and the Lyle kind of line that you're talking about is that you have the ability to banish yourself if you want. Imagine playing Milo and again Teeth and Ambitions, and you just put both of them on him, where he's the one banished, and so your opponent loses all their cards because you were proactive about it. So I think that there's very creative ways now to remove cards and to get out of sticky situations. I think up until this point, the only real way to get out of late game sticky situations has been Be Prepared.
And so that's the main way of removal usually is by banishing. And if that's the case, if Milo and Lyle become meta, there is a interesting card that comes back into play, I believe, in a way it is not being used currently. And that is Yzma, Scary Beyond All Reason.
Okay.
So
hit us with it.
When you play this character, shuffle another chosen character card into their player's deck. That player draws 2 cards. So you're able to remove a Milo. You're able to remove a Lyle without banishing them. Which I think is Now, obviously, your opponent is drawing 2, but let's say like you need a like Lyle's on the board, right? And you've got I don't know 4 or 5 cards on the board, and that's a big lore change for a B prep if you have a B prep.
Yeah, if they B prep your board with 5 characters on it, they lose 5 lore or 4 lore if Lyle's one of them.
So that's a big deal. Like
I agree.
A big change.
So, in my mind, the shift here, we haven't even talked about locations this time. Like, obviously, locations are going to be a really, really new way of playing the game that could either slow the speed down depending on the location or speed the game up depending on the location. And so the pace of the game could change very much, I think, this time. There's a lot of tools for aggro side, which there hasn't been a ton up until this point. I think there's some definite control tools as well, but I think that the threats that you're going to have to look out for are going to be very different than they have been up until this point. Again, the biggest threats have always been songs. I don't know of anything that like scares me as much as Be Prepared, or that scares me as much as like Grab Your Swords plus Tinkerbell when playing Steel. There's just not many things that can do as much damage to you as those songs. Mm-hmm. And now there's a lot of options that are going to keep those songs from happening, that are going to create a lot of opportunities to remove characters from the board that haven't been there before, from banishing your own characters, from removing your own characters, losing lore, you name it. I think there's continuing to be shifts, pun intended, in the way that the game is going to like play itself out. And then again, I started with locations, but I didn't finish with locations. And locations.
And it's all in Emerald at the moment. All of the song countering at the moment.
Yeah, and again, I think that plays into the Emerald shenanigans. But Ursula's inkable. The Flotsam Jetsam we talked about last time are both inkable. We did get some uninkable this time with Lyle and Milo. Plus Bell hit an archer from this, from Rise of the Floodborn, which says your opponent has to discard their whole hand if she's banished in a challenge. And so again, I think with the recklessness of Lyle, plus the Bell hit an archer, plus John Silver, I think there's a lot of synergies there. You still have to be very cognizant of the amount of uninkables that you're putting in, though, because Lyle being uninkable, Milo being uninkable, Bellhead and Archer being uninkable, there's still a lot of, I think, you have to be very precise with that tactic that you're wanting to use. But yeah, we're really early on in this, and the hype is definitely real, but I think the potential has never been higher with this set, and I'm definitely as hype as I've ever been with this set.
No, I think for sure. I mean, obviously, locations is not the only new game-changing thing we're getting, I don't think. And maybe that's a little too early to say, but I think that there are a lot of other pieces coming into play now, and not these being the only ones. I'm sure there will be other ones coming down the pipeline here. I mean, we're
39 cards into a 200 card set,
and we're getting close to February here, which is release month.
Yep.
So we're getting super close. I think now is the time that they're going to start revealing these on a pretty frequent.
Well, with the amount that they did yesterday, yeah, it's going to be a frequent basis.
I mean, let me check here. We might have new cards as we speak.
I don't think they do on the weekends.
Do they not do weekends?
No, I don't think they do on the weekends. But the last point that I'll make, and then we'll wrap this one up, is, initially when we saw the location reveal and they started talking about Into the Inklands, I was like, man, they're really changing the game really quickly. Mm-hmm. After this Chapter 2 has played out and we've continued to see that there's been basically the same meta for the entire time that Lorcana's been out. I know that there's been a lot of stuff in the recent weeks that have really popped up with some of the Steel Tiana stuff and the Mufasa decks and a little bit more different aggro. Like, there's definitely a variety, but still the dominant forces are Steel Song and Ruby Amethyst. And so with all these changes, I'm really, really, really hoping that this is just a blanket shift in the meta.
And really, to prove your point even more there, like, the reason all these new decks are popping up is because people are bored. That's the reason these are popping up. Because they're very combo based, they're very niche. The reason those are happening is because people are getting bored with the meta.
I think it was, initially there were a lot, like the Mufasa came up to try to counter Ruby Amethyst. But yeah, in your point, I think that there's just a lot of like counter Ruby Amethyst, which is tired of the meta. I don't want to play Ruby Amethyst, and I'm tired of playing against Ruby Amethyst, and so I need something that counters it. But to your point too, like I still have yet to like find a deck that I like love playing. I had one in Chapter 1. I never had the cards to actually play it in person because it ran Rapunzel and Surfer Stitch, and so I never actually got to do that one. But yeah, I'm still like I've said I'm going to be a green-red player or an Emerald Ruby player going into next season. We'll see if that holds up or not. But I'm super excited. I think that the shift and what's going to be strong in the overall metagame is going to change a lot, and I really hope that's the case because to your point, I'm kind of tired of Balance and Ruby Amethyst.
I think that's the main thing too. I think there's enough changes on the horizon.
There very well could
to
be.
help.
Yeah, so I agree. Okay, I think that's all I got for this one.
Man, I mean,
I feel like we blazed through it, but we're 45 minutes in and we're at the end of the episode.
I mean, we went through a lot of cards.
Yeah, we went through a ton. It's just my mind is going so quick because it's just so exciting. There's so many cool things coming.
I mean, you've got this organized play. Just it's a great time to be a Lorcana fan.
It is definitely a great time to be a Lorcana fan. Yeah, we've said we wouldn't talk about Chapter 3 a ton, and I feel like we are, but
now we are. Eventually, it took us time.
But I like I said, we wanted to talk about it this time because it was very much in the realm of like how this is going to change versus just like here are all the mundane facts about these cards, which we did a little bit. But the point is that we are very hopeful that this is going to be a big paradigm change to the way that the game like plays itself out. Which I think there's a lot of cards in there that make you lose lore, so it could extend games from that way. Anyways, I'm rambling now.
It's all good.
Any last comments? I'll let you wrap it up.
13th Legendary. Morph.
Morph is going to be a fun one. I'm on board with Morph. Morph's cool.
I don't think he's going to play it at all, to be completely honest.
Oh, I think he will. I 100%. He's inkable. If he dies right away with Lyle on board, your opponent loses lore from him, and so you get a bonus for losing him.
No, I mean I understand the attraction there, but I don't think he's going to get played.
I think he gets played.
I hope he does.
Okay, we need to mark this. We need hold us accountable here. Jake's on the he doesn't get played. I'm on the he does get played bandwagon. We'll check back.
I hope he does.
We'll check back in 6 weeks and see how this goes. But anyways, everyone, thanks again for listening. Appreciate all the support on the videos and the podcast and the affiliate links and everything. If you have any questions about Chapter 3 or anything you want us to cover going into the new split, please let us know. And as always, thanks for listening.
All right, thank you guys.